The Associated Press recently reported that the President of the United States publicly criticized European allies for failing to help fix the damage caused by the ongoing military campaign against Iran. The official broadcast from Washington frames this as a failure of loyalty. The President demands that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the European Union deploy their naval fleets to secure the Strait of Hormuz. He accuses them of hiding behind the American military shield. He calls them hesitant. The mainstream media amplifies this as a crisis of transatlantic unity. They debate the political friction between Western leaders. They are completely missing the structural reality of the battlefield. To understand what is truly happening, we must peel back the first layer of the onion. This is not a diplomatic disagreement over shared values. It is a calculated refusal to participate in a geographical suicide mission. The European nations are not staying home out of cowardice. They are staying home because they can do math. For the past several weeks, the United States has waged an aggressive, preemptive military campaign. The stated objective was to neutralize the adversary, secure the free flow of global energy, and establish absolute deterrence. The outcome has been the exact opposite. The initial strikes did not cause the Iranian command structure to collapse. They fertilized it. The decapitation strategy removed the pragmatic elements of the leadership and handed total control to a younger, highly radicalized, and fully mobilized security apparatus. Washington broke the lock on the global energy supply chain. Now, the door is swinging wide open into a storm of retaliatory fire, and the United States is demanding that Europe stand in the doorway. Let us examine the tactical truth that the defense ministries in Paris, Berlin, and London understand perfectly well. This is the second layer of the onion.
The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. The shipping lanes are shallow and highly predictable. The Iranian coastline is a massive, elevated fortress of limestone ridges and deep mountain tunnels. The United Kingdom and France possess some of the most advanced naval destroyers in the world. They have highly capable anti-aircraft and anti-missile systems. But advanced technology is irrelevant when geography dictates the terms of engagement. Sending a billion-dollar European frigate into a confined waterway surrounded by thousands of hidden, road-mobile anti-ship missiles is not a demonstration of Allied solidarity. It is a mathematical liquidation. The Iranian military doctrine does not rely on sinking Western ships in a conventional naval battle. Their doctrine relies on asymmetric saturation. They utilize coastal batteries that fire solid fuel missiles which can be launched and hidden back inside the mountain within 12 minutes. They deploy swarms of loitering munitions that cost $20,000 to manufacture. When a European warship enters the Persian Gulf, it must use interceptor missiles that cost $3 million each to shoot down drones that cost less than a used civilian vehicle. If the defense system works perfectly, the European nation goes bankrupt. If the defense system fails for a single second, a billion-dollar national asset is sent to the bottom of the ocean. The pride of the Western navies is not being deterred by a superior naval force. It is being neutralized by the raw physics of the choke point. You cannot maneuver a warship out of the way of a saturation strike when you have no open ocean to hide in. The European refusal is not a failure of courage. It is a recognition of obsolescence. This brings us to the profound consequences of the American strategic miscalculation. The United States initiated this conflict under the assumption that a massive display of high-altitude stealth technology would paralyze the region. They assumed that the sheer cost of their weapons would force the adversary to submit. But the adversary understood the mechanics of power. Iran knew that they could not win the sky, so they decided to weaponize the water. By targeting commercial infrastructure and turning the Strait of Hormuz into a contested kill zone, Tehran shifted the battlefield from military assets to global commodities. They created an environment where the presence of an American aircraft carrier does not lower the price of oil. It actually raises the risk premium. The United States has created a quagmire of its own design. They cannot withdraw without destroying their global credibility, but they cannot stay without burning through their finite supply of precision munitions and interceptor missiles. Washington is trapped in a war of attrition that heavily favors the defender of the geography. Therefore, the United States is desperately trying to internationalize the conflict. They want European flags on the ships burning in the Gulf. They want to spread the financial and political cost of the disaster across the entire North Atlantic Treaty Organization. They need the European presence to legitimize a failed strategy to the domestic American voter. The leaders in Europe see this trap clearly, and they have made the cold, pragmatic decision to let Washington own its failure alone. We must now trace the second-order effects of this European refusal. This is where the geopolitical standoff reaches directly into your personal finances. The global maritime insurance syndicates located in London do not operate on patriotism. They operate on actuarial tables and risk assessment. These syndicates have been watching the deployment of naval forces very closely. If the combined navies of the European Union refuse to escort commercial supertankers through the Persian Gulf, the actuaries in London make a very simple, very devastating calculation. The waterway is fundamentally uninsurable. When the maritime insurance disappears, the shipping companies have no choice. The supertankers drop their anchors in safe harbors. They do not enter the Gulf. They do not load the crude oil. They do not move. When the tankers stop moving, 20% of the daily global petroleum supply simply vanishes from the open market. Furthermore, 30% of the global liquefied natural gas supply, primarily originating from Qatar, is also trapped behind the geographical blockade. The price of crude oil does not just experience a market fluctuation, it violently corrects to a new, devastating baseline. We are looking at a trajectory that easily breaches $150 per barrel. This is the domino effect in action. An American president demands European naval support. The Europeans look at the mathematics of asymmetric drone warfare and refuse. The insurance companies look at the lack of allied naval escorts and cancel the policies. The ships stop. The oil stops. That is why, within a matter of weeks, you will pay 30% more for your fuel, your winter heating, and your basic agricultural goods. You will pay this premium regardless of whether you live in North America, Europe, or Asia. The cost of a strategic blunder in the Middle East is paid at the cash register of every citizen on Earth. We must also examine the deep strategic paradox that is currently tearing the Western alliance apart from the inside out. On paper, the United States and the nations of the European Union are fighting on the same side of a global ideological divide. They share intelligence, they share banking systems, they share military doctrines, but their core national interests in this specific conflict are perfectly opposed. Washington needs a prolonged, heavily militarized presence in the Gulf to save face and justify the initial preemptive strikes. The American administration needs to prove that its maximum pressure doctrine was correct, even if it takes years of blockade warfare to do it. Europe, however, is entirely dependent on external energy flows. The European industrial base, particularly in Germany and Italy, cannot survive a sustained period of crude oil trading at record highs. A prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz means the deindustrialization of the European continent. It means mass unemployment. It means the collapse of their ruling governments. The leaders in Berlin, Paris, and Rome are not looking for a military victory over Tehran. They do not care about American prestige. They are looking for a quiet, desperate mechanism to surrender the immediate objective and get the oil flowing again. This creates a scenario that causes immense discomfort in the policy rooms of Washington. The adversaries of the United States are waiting for the American strategy to collapse. But ironically, the allies of the United States are waiting for the exact same thing. Behind closed doors, the European powers are waiting for Washington to exhaust its political capital. They are waiting for the American military to admit that the naval blockade cannot be broken from the air. Once the United States accepts this reality, the European nations plan to bypass Washington entirely and negotiate a separate, pragmatic peace with the adversary. They are willing to abandon the superpower to save their own economies. Alliances are built on shared interests. When survival is on the line, alliances are the first thing to be liquidated. The President of the United States is standing at a podium demanding that Europe help fix the damage.
But Europe knows that the damage is structural.
The old era of gunboat diplomacy, where Western navies could dictate the terms of global trade by parking a destroyer off the coast of a developing nation, is dead. It was killed by the democratization of precision guidance technology. It was killed by the solid fuel missile and the loitering drone. The technology that the West invented has been reverse-engineered, mass-produced, and turned against them by adversaries who understand how to leverage their own geography. The United States is angry that Europe will not fight a 20th century war in a 21st century threat environment. Europe is refusing because they know that sending a heavy cruiser to hunt a swarm of cheap drones is a fundamental misunderstanding of the mechanics of power. The board has shifted completely. The United States is trying to shame its allies into sharing the cost of a catastrophic miscalculation. The allies are choosing economic preservation over transatlantic obedience. This is not a temporary rift. This is the permanent fracturing of the global security architecture. In the next part of this briefing, we will look deep into the specific operational failures of the carrier strike groups that forced Washington to beg for European help in the first place. We will analyze the unintended economic consequences of the American sanctions regime, and we will dissect why the true winners of this conflict are quietly watching from Beijing and Moscow. The layers of this strategic failure run deep, and the consequences will reshape the geopolitical map for the next century. We have moved past the diplomatic theater of burden sharing and transatlantic unity. We have established that the European refusal to join the naval blockade is not a failure of courage, but a cold mathematical calculation. Now, we must examine the operational rot that forced Washington to beg for European assistance in the first place. The administration in the United States is projecting an image of absolute military dominance. The president claims the military objectives are nearing completion. He claims the European allies are simply riding on the coattails of American power. But the structural reality in the waters of the Persian Gulf tells a completely different story. It is the story of a global superpower currently absorbing the consequences of a war it was never designed to win. Let us peel back the next layer of the onion and look at the illusion of naval supremacy. For decades, the United States Navy has projected power through its carrier strike groups. These are floating fortresses. A Ford-class aircraft carrier costs $13 billion. It carries thousands of sailors and dozens of advanced stealth fighter jets. In the open ocean of the Pacific or the Atlantic, a carrier strike group is the undisputed master of the battlefield. It has thousands of miles of open water to maneuver. It has time and distance to track and destroy incoming threats. But the Persian Gulf is not the open ocean. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. The waters are shallow. The navigation channels are highly predictable. Geography has taken the greatest naval force in human history and placed it inside a narrow bathtub surrounded by hostile mountains. In this specific geography, the massive size of an aircraft carrier is not an advantage. It is a fatal liability. You cannot use stealth technology to hide a 300-meter-long nuclear-powered ship in a geographical choke point. The Iranian military planners understand the physics of this trap perfectly. They do not possess a blue-water navy. They never tried to build one. They knew they could not defeat the United States in a conventional ship-to-ship battle. Therefore, they built an asymmetric denial force. They constructed thousands of fast attack boats. They manufactured tens of thousands of loitering drones. They built coastal anti-ship missile batteries that hide deep within the limestone caves of the Zagros Mountains. This brings us to the mathematics of saturation. The United States Navy relies on the Aegis combat system to protect its ships. It is a multi-billion-dollar radar and interceptor network. But it is a finite shield. To intercept a threat, the system must launch a standard missile. Each of these interceptor missiles costs between $2 million and $4 million. When Iran launches a coordinated wave of 100 drones, the defense system must track 100 targets. It must achieve 100 simultaneous radar locks. It must launch 100 interceptors. The cost to Iran to launch that swarm is roughly $2 million.
The cost to the United States to intercept it is hundreds of millions of dollars.
Even if the success rate of the United States Navy is 99%, the mathematics of saturation dictate that one projectile will get through. If that one $20,000 drone strikes the primary radar dome of a guided missile destroyer, the ship is not sunk, but it is completely blinded. And a blind destroyer in a contested waterway is no longer a strategic asset. It is a burning liability. The United States is burning through years of interceptor production in a matter of weeks. The missile magazines on the destroyers are limited. They cannot be reloaded at sea in the middle of a combat zone. Once the launch tubes are empty, the multi-billion-dollar ship must retreat. We are witnessing a strategic inversion. The most expensive military in human history is being bled dry by the most cost-effective one. This is not a demonstration of naval dominance. It is a mathematical liquidation. Now, we must ask the critical question. Why did the President of the United States publicly demand that the European Union and the United Kingdom send their navies to the Gulf? Why does a superpower need help from nations with a fraction of its defense budget? The answer lies in a massive blind spot in American naval doctrine. The United States spent the last 20 years preparing for a deep-water conflict with peer adversaries like China. They built massive ships for long-range combat. In doing so, they neglected the dirty, specialized work of shallow-water, littoral combat. Specifically, they neglected their mine-clearing capabilities. Iran possesses one of the most sophisticated arsenals of smart naval mines in the world. They do not need to fire a single missile to close the Strait of Hormuz. They only need to drop a dozen advanced acoustic mines into the shipping channel. The moment those mines enter the water, the commercial supertankers stop moving. The insurance companies in London freeze their coverage. To reopen the channel, a navy must deploy specialized mine-hunting vessels. These are small, non-magnetic ships equipped with advanced sonar and submersible drones. The United States Navy simply does not have enough of these specialized vessels in the region. But the European navies do. The Royal Navy of the United Kingdom and the Marine Nationale of France possess the exact shallow water mine hunting capabilities that the United States desperately needs. Washington launched a massive preemptive war to secure a maritime choke point, only to realize they lacked the specific tools required to actually clear the water. They are demanding that Europe supply those tools, and Europe is refusing. The defense ministries in Berlin and Paris know that clearing mines in a narrow channel while under constant fire from coastal missile batteries is an impossible task. It is a slow, methodical process that requires ships to move at a crawling pace. They would be sitting ducks for Iranian drone swarms. The German defense minister described it accurately. It is a suicide operation. The President of the United States is furiously tweeting because he has realized he is trapped. He cannot win the war from the air, he cannot secure the water without European minesweepers, and the Europeans will not sacrifice their ships to save his political legacy. A superpower without the proper tools is just a very loud target. We must now examine the unintended consequences of the maximum pressure sanctions campaign. This is the third layer of the onion, and it explains why the adversary has not collapsed. For decades, the United States weaponized the global banking system. They cut Iran out of international financial networks. They embargoed their oil. The central theory in Washington was that economic strangulation would force the regime to capitulate or face a total domestic uprising. That was the computer model. The structural reality is the exact opposite. When you cut a nation off from the global supply chain, you force them to build their own. Iran could not buy advanced fighter jets or precision munitions from Western defense contractors. So, they learned to build their own solid-fuel ballistic missiles. They learned to manufacture lethal drones using consumer-grade electronics and reverse-engineered components. The sanctions did not starve the Iranian military-industrial complex. They immunized it. Washington created a self-sufficient, decentralized fortress.
The maximum pressure campaign built the very asymmetric monster the United States is currently fighting. Sanctions are a scalpel, but over 40 years, the patient develops a permanent immunity to the blade. This leads directly to the second-order economic effects that are destroying the American political calendar. Because Iran has been locked out of the dollar system, they have been forced to find alternative markets. They sell millions of barrels of discounted oil to China, and they settle those transactions in Chinese yuan. They bypass the American financial system entirely. The current military conflict has only accelerated this transition. If the Strait of Hormuz remains contested, the global supply of energy drops. The price of crude oil surges toward $150 per barrel. This triggers a massive spike in global inflation. The average citizen in the United States does not care about the tactical performance of a bunker buster bomb. They care about the price of gasoline at the local station. They care about the cost of groceries. When fuel hits $7 a gallon in the American Midwest, the ruling political party faces an electoral massacre. The true casualty of this war is not an Iranian drone. It is the global demand for the United States dollar. If the world realizes that Washington can no longer guarantee the safe passage of energy from the Middle East, the foundation of the petrodollar crumbles. This is why your retirement portfolio is bleeding. The structural foundations of the global economy are being rewritten in the waters of the Persian Gulf. The weapon is not the missile. The weapon is the price of oil. Finally, we must look at the true beneficiaries of this conflict. Who actually wins this war? It is not Washington, and it is not Tehran. The true winners are sitting quietly in Beijing and Moscow. The leadership in China is watching the United States exhaust its military resources and political capital in the Middle East. China continues to receive heavily discounted, sanctioned oil via secure land routes and ghost fleets. They are watching the American interceptor stockpiles deplete. Every Patriot missile fired at a cheap drone in the Persian Gulf is a missile that is not deployed to the Pacific theater. The leadership in Russia is utilizing this conflict to field test their integrated satellite and electronic warfare networks against the most advanced American defense systems. They are gathering priceless operational intelligence without risking a single Russian soldier. Furthermore, the rising price of global crude oil directly funds the Russian national treasury. The United States is doing the heavy lifting. They are burning through billions of dollars and destroying their own alliances. Meanwhile, their primary global competitors sit back, take notes, and reap the geopolitical rewards. The United States is fighting a tactical war. China and Russia are winning a strategic transition. This is the ultimate strategic paradox. The President of the United States is criticizing the European allies to prepare a political parachute. He needs a scapegoat. The midterm elections are approaching in November. He cannot admit that the military strategy failed. He cannot admit that geography defeated technology. Therefore, he must shift the blame. He will tell the American public that the United States military was magnificent, but the cowardly allies in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization failed to hold the line. He will use the European refusal as the justification to declare a premature victory and withdraw the fleets before the economic damage becomes terminal. The era of uncontested American hegemony in the Middle East is over. The security architecture has been shattered. The alliances are liquidating. Geography has reclaimed its throne as the ultimate arbiter of power. Behind the narrative, the structural shift is accelerating. The official story is an illusion engineered for public consumption, while the strategic reality belongs strictly to those who calculate the raw mechanics of power. Position yourself ahead of the curve and master the information advantage that dictates the new global order.